Next up, we're going to be talking about the business of native advertising. And just show me a quick show of hands. How many people know what native advertising is? If I ran up and I grabbed you by the collar, could you define it? Very good, very good. When we had that plug for Polar from Roberta in the last session, that was not native advertising. That was just a happy accident there. Native is really one of the more exciting opportunities to come to digital media sales. My wife works in digital media at a major consumer brand, and that's all she's dealing with these days is the request for native advertising. Really how to integrate that into the experience of the reader for the advertiser. Today we're going to be talking about the business of native advertising, what you need to know about this, how this really compares to other forms of digital media advertising, and how to really maximize your use of native. I'm happy to welcome Tony Vlismas, Head of Strategy at Polar. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Pretty good? Because I can't, yeah, okay, I think we can hear me now. Thanks everyone, good afternoon, good morning rather. I have the unfortunate pleasure of being the person right before lunch. So, but hopefully this will be worth it. So thanks so much. We're here to talk about native ads. This is a topic that's really hot right now in the topic, in the industry. That's me over there. So I look after market strategy for Polar. We'll talk about Polar in just a sec, but I also wanted to introduce Jen. She's back there as well. So she's our sales director based out of New York. So I'm going to be here the rest of the day. She's going to be here the rest of the event. So afterwards, if you guys want to talk anything about native ads, we love talking about it. So please find us and we'll chat. This slide is not, is designed to go, ooh, we work with a lot of great publishers, but it's also really up there to validate that we work with a lot of great publishers. Oh, thank you, Jen. We're having some wireless problems here. Okay, we're going to start over. Anyways, so but what it does is it also validates that because we work with a lot of these great tier 1 providers, we're able to get a lot of best practices from them. Okay, so there we go. But what we're here to talk about today. Okay, so I want to set up a couple of intro slides before we really get into the meat and the content. So anecdotally, when we talk to a lot of our publishers and say, what does content look like today when it comes to your digital stream? They say today about 20% of their revenue comes from content, 15% from indirect, and then direct sold, you're talking about networks, that kind of stuff. And then direct sold display about 65%. When we ask these same publishers, where do you project that you're going in a couple of years? It looks a little more like this, where they really see content taking about 50% of their digital revenue business. And there's a lot of data out there. This is one study that shows content marketing is the fastest growing digital advertising means out there. So it's growing at a faster rate than anything else. It's why we're really excited. It's why people are so excited about it. But here's one of the challenges that as publishers we have to keep in mind. You'll remember many, many years ago, there were a lot of search engines out there. There was AOL, there was WebCrawler, there was Ask Jeeves and this nice little bow tie. But fast forward to where we are today, and the market of search is predominantly dominated by Google, and to a lesser extent, Bing and Yahoo. Now, Facebook, Twitter, these other social guys are really great at native. And today, they're eating a lot of publishers' lunches. So what we have to do is make sure that as publishers, we go to market with a really strong strategy so that we don't get into another search engine type of problem within native. So by the end of this session, what I hope is that you'll not only learn a lot more about how to build your native ad business, but how to increase revenue through it. So let's jump in. These are some of the categories, some of the things we're going to talk about. We're going to look at some market leaders, the different components that make up a native ad program, some media plans. We often get asked, how do I price my media plans? I'm going to show you some great pricing plans. And we have a lot of benchmarks, a lot of data, so we're going to share some of that. And if there's time, we'll look at some go-to-market strategies as well. And whatever we don't cover, we'll absolutely can talk about over lunch or later on in the day. If you want a copy of this deck, send me an email, tony@polar.me. And we're a kind of small team, so if you guys have any questions as we go along, feel free to just shout out. So let's look at some of the market leaders, and this is really just to validate that native is working, and a lot of companies are making a lot of money from it. Look at Slate. Slate turned on their program, and within the first 30 days, they were already making $100 million. Now, again, obviously they have a lot of traffic coming into their site, but what it really emphasizes is that there's a lot of scale. We look at companies like Forbes, 30% of all their digital revenue comes from their native ads program called Brand Voice. So again, demonstrating that there's a lot of money to be made in native. Look at the Telegraph. So the Telegraph is one of our clients across the pond. They have 90 active content campaigns going on all at once. These guys are the poster child when it comes to native ads. You go to their homepage, there's like 5 or 6 different native ad placements. So again, proving scale is very possible. And this last one, HuffPost, 50% of HuffPost's native ad content is on their mobile. And as publishers, one of the challenges that we have is monetizing this thing right here, our mobile phones. Native ad is a great way to mobilize or to monetize mobile. Before we go on, just a quick show of hands. How many are publishers in the room? Okay. Oh, okay, that's good. Pretty much everyone. And how many are running native ads today? Okay, great. I put my hand up, but I'm not a publisher, so I don't know why. Let's talk about the different components of a native ad program. There's 4 main components. The first is probably the most obvious. It's the actual native ad media impression itself. So I want to introduce you to Extreme Pushup. It's our made-up website that we're going to be featuring throughout our demo here. A native ad, the initial impression is the piece that sits in your stream that looks like the content around it and is contextually relevant. And that's really important. We define native as having 2 main things. The first has to look like the content around it. A lot of display banners can today look like the content around it, but that's where the second piece comes in. It needs to be contextually relevant. If I'm on Men's Health and I'm scrolling down and looking at men's articles, and then all of a sudden I see a native ad for a woman's shaving product, that's not contextually relevant to me. So those 2 things need to be present really to have a true native campaign. And when you click through to that, you get to your actual engagement or the view. That's that secondary page. That's the article itself, the piece of content that's sponsored. Now this makes up the first, probably the most obvious piece of the native ad component. Now, as you know, Polar is a native ads provider, so you might expect me to come here and say the banner is dead. But we don't think that. We think the banner might be dying or very sick, but the banner and native can work very well together, hand in hand. Everyone knows this. This is the sales funnel. You have your top and you have your bottom. Native is great for top of the funnel sales activities. It's great for brand awareness. It's great when you're trying to get your brand recognition out there or trying to get recall so that when someone sees your native ad and then they go to a store later, they recall your brand. But display is still great for performance, and that's that bottom of the funnel sale. Display is still great for pushing that envelope, getting activation or conversion. So how in your strategy can these 2 pieces work together? Here's some examples. On the far left hand, you had what's called roadblocking or 100% share of voice or sponsorships. There's a lot of different names for it. But basically what it is the sponsored content, all the display ads around it are from the same company. So for example, if AT&T sponsored the content that you're reading, all the display ads around it are also going to be AT&T, because wouldn't it be horrible if all of a sudden a Verizon ad pops up or something like that? The middle is run of site. That's using display to drive traffic from other areas of your site to the sponsored content. And the last one, audience extension offsite, comes in particularly handy when you have sister sites or partner publications. So that's again using display to drive content back to the originals, to drive traffic back to the original sponsor content. So display, native can work very well together when they're partnered up. And you can sell display at a higher rate when you sell it with native, and we're going to talk about that in a sec. The third category, the third thing we're going to talk about, if we progress here, is content, and luckily I know this deck offhand, but luckily we have the slides up there. So there's lots of different ways to create content. The first is a content platform. So that's using a platform content like a NewsCred or a Contently. Think of these as networks of publishers. So where you can go to them and either, quote unquote, rent a journalist to write content for you, or they have pre-written content and you can buy it or lease it from them. Then you have creative agencies. We all know what those are. Those are your PR agencies, your ad agencies that can actually write content for you. Or you can do it in-house. You can have in-house publishers. If you're a publisher, you of course already have on-hand writers. So a lot of publishers create I'm sorry, hang on. Sorry, let me back up for a sec. In-house as in the brand themselves can write it. Sorry, a lot of times the brand has in-house authors that will write the content. But for the most part, what we're seeing is a lot of the content comes from that fourth category right there, which is the custom content group. That's what I was starting to mix my words over earlier. That's when the publisher, who already has editors, pulls some of those editors aside or hires other journalists and creates a custom content team. This is a group that sits separately from the editorial team, and they focus solely on creating sponsored content. The point here is no matter how the brand gets content, they're going to have to always pay for it. And that's a big piece here. Because one of the things that we said earlier is native ads should be making you money. And I'm still surprised that a lot of publishers, when they're creating the content for their brands, they're not charging their brand for it. Because they say, well, I can't possibly charge the brand for it, they won't pay for it. But remember, if you don't charge and if you don't write it, they're going to pay someone else to write it. So this is a good way to make revenue. To start, put together a sample rate card like you see there. Charge based on article, photo gallery, video, infographics, or even research. Who better to do research than publishers themselves? You guys know how to do this, so start charging for it. Some other ways as well to create content. Remember, content's more than just words. It's more than just an article. Maybe you put together an infographic. I'm sure you see these are really popular, so it's really taking big stats and pictures and putting it together to create an infographic. Also very shareable. That's now going to bring earned media back to your side. You can create ebooks for your sponsor. Curated content, very popular these days as well. You can do things like webinars, podcasts, even Google Hangouts. Lots of different ways to create content. SlideShare, this is really big, especially with B2B. We see a lot of B2B publishers take great content and put it onto SlideShare. This can be custom content. You can then sponsor this or create a sponsored article around this content, which then a brand can slap a logo on. Also really popular in the B2B side is case studies. Again, great ways for your sponsors to get their message out there and pay you for it. And last we have videos as well. So this is one thing, for example, that Lowe's does. These little videos are great. And again, if you're using social sites, what's great is the shareability around them, which again is going to bring that earned media back to you. So sponsored content. Creating content, a revenue maker. Now it's time to jump into our Wayback Machine. Back in the days when we used to be able to post a video on YouTube and become overnight sensations and become really famous. Those days are pretty much dead. They're behind us when it comes to organic viral. You don't have to look any further than during the Oscars. Those that saw the Oscars might remember Ellen took that very famous selfie and it became the most retweeted selfie in history. What a lot of people don't realize is on the back end, you had Samsung's agency, you had the Oscars agency, and you had Twitter themselves back there pushing that content out there. That's why it became the most retweeted history, or the most retweeted tweet in history. That's called paid amplification. And this is something that as a publisher you should absolutely be doing. Now here's how it works. Something that your brand, the sponsor's already going to do. What it is it's using social and the power of social to amplify your message. Now, if you don't do it, the brand will. So if a brand is working with you on a native ad strategy and they have this great content, they are going to use their own distribution through their own Facebook, LinkedIn, whatnot, to amplify that content out there. Now, by you taking this on, it does a few things. First of all, Doing this manually, anyone that's done this knows it's a pain in the ass because everyone is different. Facebook, different requirements. Twitter, different requirements. LinkedIn, different requirements. Then you have to manage the invoicing separately. Then you have to dynamically create each of the content. Then you have to optimize separately. Then it just goes on and on. So no brand actually wants to do this. Second, who better to optimize and know how to amplify content than a publisher? Again, it's your bread and butter. It's what you guys do, is bring content, bring audience to your content. Third, because it's a pain in the ass for any brand to do, this makes them stickier to you. Suddenly, you're adding more value to their native ad strategy. That means that when it's time for a repeat buy, they stay with you as well. On top of that, paid amplification, what we found is when we look at paid amplification or social amplification, when it's amplified from the publisher's, let's say, Twitter handle, the CTR is actually higher than that than if it's from the brand. So let's think about this for a sec. If I'm IKEA and I wrote sponsored content on, let's say, the Washington Post, and I send out that from my IKEA handle, if I'm already not an IKEA user, I'm not even going to see that tweet. But if I'm a Washington Post reader and I trust them and they're valuable and I know that they're going to provide valuable content, I am, and they show me this article that IKEA sponsored that is in the Washington Post, the propensity of me clicking it is higher. So we're seeing a lot better engagement when the publisher does it. Now, what's in it for you? Extra revenue on top. Because now, whatever Facebook, LinkedIn, all these other guys charge, you, of course, are going to take a bit off the top of that. So another way to make money through native ads. Those are our 4 components: the native ad media itself, the companion display, the content creation, and social amplification. These 4 things together combine to make a great native ads program. So now that you have a native ads program, how do you price it? How do you go to market with it? I'm glad you asked. That's what we're going to talk about right now, media plans. Now, this should look familiar to everyone. The sponsorship. This is every publisher's bread and butter. This is the easiest way when there's new media to price something. It's comfortable, it's easy to put together, it's easy to scale as well. In a case like this, you have your native advertising campaign is a flat rate sponsorship of, let's use a round number, $75,000. That sponsorship includes the native ad impression itself, some companion display ads, and the content creation piece. It's all together. Now, as a publisher, when you're ready to evolve that, you go to a model that looks a little something like this. So now you start to get CPM or CPE. Same price. You're still making the same amount of money. The difference here is really your impression capping. And that's the basic difference between sponsorship and CPM or CPE, is that you put a cap on your impression. You value your inventory. The challenge with sponsorship is if you sell, let's say, 1 million impressions, but you actually end up delivering 1.2 because you had no way of turning off that ad, you're now devaluing your own inventory. And what happens when that brand comes back to rebuy the following quarter? They're not going to pay that premium that you asked for the first time because they're going to say, wait a minute, but this doesn't work out. When I look at the impressions, you actually made less money. So with CPM or CPE, you now impression cap. So let's say we say at 3 million impressions at $25 a CPM still gets you $75,000. Or you go the CPE model and you say for 50,000 views, $1.50 each, you get $75,000. Here's what we think is an even better way of doing it that is going to make you more money. And we've actually had a lot of publishers that after going through our best practices series have evolved from this to this. Now, this might look a little more complex, but it's not. It's a true media plan. It's where things are broken up. So let's start populating in the numbers. Now, you're not charging a flat rate, and you're not including everything. You're saying native ad is valuable, and I'm going to charge you separately for each of the components. So let's look at them. The first is the native ad budget. It's still 3 million impressions at a $25 CPM, and it's still $75,000. But now you say, I'm going to charge you separately for display. So your companion displays. Let's say I'm going to charge you $2 million at $15 CPM. That's $30,000. I'm going to charge you for creating content. Now, let's say you create 12 pieces of content over 30 days. Now, as an aside, just like displays, and display fatigue, you can get content fatigue as well. That's why it's important to remember that as you're putting your native ad strategy together for your brands, that you're not just using 1 or 2 pieces of content. Vary it up. Use different things. It also gives you a reason to charge more. So let's say that's 10 grand. Then content amplification. It's the thing we just talked about. Let's say you're going to give them 80,000 views at 25 cents CPC when in fact maybe the social sites are charging you 20 or 15. That's 20,000 right there. And then, hey, while we're at it, let's throw in some branded video, $20 CPM at $20,000. Now you're at $155,000 budget. We went from charging $75,000 and including everything to $155,000. Now, it's a bit of a sticker shock. If you were to, in the previous model, go, it's going to be $155,000. But when a media planner sees it broken up like this, and this is why we're seeing publishers have success with this, this is what a typical media planner sees when they see this. They go, okay, I get it. You've broken it up into different buckets. So let's work our way from the bottom up. Branded video. Yeah, I have money set aside for video. I can pull from that budget. Content amplification. I can pull that from my social budget. Content creation. I have some design budget. I can pull from that. Display media. Well, every media buyer has display budget, so they can pull from that. And the native ad, if they don't have a native ad budget, maybe they have an experimental or they pull it out of social. The point is, when it's broken up like this, instead of saying this program is going to cost you $155,000, you say it's going to cost you these, broken up like this. And what it does is it allows them to start pulling from the right buckets. And it's why we've seen a lot of our clients almost overnight with these type of media plans start making more money. Now, you might want to transition to something like this. So let's go back for a second. Remember when I talked about content, and I said I still can't believe that some publishers don't charge for content. And they say, well, it's difficult because we've never charged for content. So to start charging for it now is really difficult. With a plan like this, what you can do is cross out, put in the dollar value of $10,000 and then cross it out and call it value add. Now, what that does is it says, look, I know that I should be charging you for content. I'm not going to. But so for this time around, I will continue to give it to you for free. But what happens is when the campaign is successful and they come back, you can say, listen, your campaign was successful because of the great content that my team wrote for you. And now we're going to have to charge you for that. Now, I caution you, it's difficult to give something for free to a brand and then take it away later. So you want to make sure that you understand who your client is when you're doing something like that. But nonetheless, just a simple example. So if you want a blank version of this, just send me an email and I'll email it to you, tony@polo.me, or check with Jen afterwards and we'll follow up. The last piece of the media plan is packaging your actual offerings. Now this is really crucial because those that are familiar with native ads will know native ads has really moved. People that buy native ads is not just your typical media buyers. Brands are starting to buy direct. Now, brands don't typically buy rich media direct or display direct, but they are starting to buy content programs direct. So it's super important that you put together a clear package and include it in your media kit, especially if you're a niche publisher. Because when brands start going to your site and start downloading your media kits, you want to make sure that you have an easy to understand native ads package. Now, I put together this sample for you, and what it shows is your high and your low. So it really gives a barrier of entry to a brand that maybe is new to native ads, but then it also gives them a way to upgrade later on when they realize, yeah, native is where I want to be. You'll notice up across the top, the 4 things that are there are the 4 different components that we just talked about. Native ads, display, content, and content amplification. And then you have a value, a lower price versus a higher price. So this is a good way to do that. Things like, for example, in the native ad, it's a certain amount of impressions that you're going to sell, but also placement. Remember that just because a native ad can appear anywhere on your site doesn't mean it needs to. Your homepage might bring in the most amount of traffic on your site. So maybe you should be charging more for that. So don't just assume that a native ad should be able to run anywhere on your site. Look at where the traffic is and then price accordingly. Here's another tip. Charge separately for mobile. If you have a large amount of traffic going to your mobile sites, and we all know consumers are moving more and more to mobile, and they're consuming content through their mobile devices, you can charge separately for that as well. So you say, okay, if you want to be on desktop, it costs this much. To be on mobile, though, it's going to cost this much. And keep certain things in mind, like for example, most users will rarely, for the most part, mobile users do not go to a homepage. They find your content through shared distribution or a referral link, so they actually go directly to the article. So keep that in mind as well when you're looking at how your traffic is divvied up on mobile. My guess is you're going to be more stacked on the article than you on the various article pages than you're on your homepage. So also keep that in mind when you're pricing this. Then things like, your typical impressions on display, how many pieces of content you create, what type of amplification. Now you have 2 price plans, easy to understand, easy to upgrade a customer later on, and as your program matures, so will this as well. Again, if you want a blank copy of this, just email us. We got some time, so let's look at some benchmarking. Now, our platform serves over 3 billion direct sold native ads. These are, again, publishers that sell this stuff direct, not a network, not demand. So that gives us a lot of great aggregated data that we can work with. So what we did is we pulled this all together into some great benchmarks. And if you're new to native ads, some of these benchmarks can help you decide how to put your program together. And if you're already in native ads, some of these might help you decide how to enhance some of them. Earlier this year as well, we teamed up with the ABM to send out a survey to a lot of the publishers that are part of the Digital Council as well. So we pulled together a lot of those survey results as well, and I want to share some of that with you today. The first thing we asked publishers is, in 2014, obviously next year we'll ask 2015, what does your digital revenue look like when it comes to native ads? And what you'll see is less than 10% said it makes up 60%, but a little over 25% said it makes up 40%. What's the takeaway here? Everyone is interested in native, and it's definitely growing, and it's going to continue to be a big part of their digital revenue, especially as banner rates start dwindling and less people start clicking and buying them. Here's another one. How do you price? So I just went over 3 different pricing models. So when we asked publishers, how do you price today? Again, it shouldn't come as a big surprise. The majority still use sponsorship. When something's new, they typically, publishers tend to go to sponsorship, and that's okay because you'll find your way. You want to figure out how to precisely package before you go out to the next step. 18% said CPM, CPE, and then again, 41% said a mix, because what they find is depending on who the client is, they might try different type of pricings. We think next year, though, we're really going to see different numbers up here. When we ask publishers what's the biggest obstacle that prevents you from increasing your native ad revenue, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise that half of them said market confusion. Because brands are still a little confused about what exactly is native. The way that I kind of define it is you can pretty much slap the word native on anything, and a brand will buy it. That's how hot native is today. But nonetheless, they're still a little confused about exactly what native is. From the publisher's perspective, they're having the challenge of how do you scale. So there's a little confusion around, okay, great, I know how to put together a program, but how do I scale it? And then how do I measure the ROI on that? What are the top metrics? So when we asked publishers, what do brands measure you on? And we gave them kind of these different scenarios. Anyone want to shout out what they think is the answer? So again, this is what the brand is measuring the publisher on when it comes to a successful native ad. What do you guys think? Just kind of shout out something. Okay, click through, page views, okay. Time spent. Okay, everyone should know that when you basically have all the above in a multiple choice, the answer is always all the above. So what's the takeaway here? What do we learn from this? What we learn is that brands are just as confused as well. So they themselves are having some of these challenges. So it's our job as leaders and as publishers to clarify these things, especially in 2015. Some other stats. What's the CTR by vertical? Now, this one I'm really happy to share, particularly because in the B2B, the vertical is the highest versus anything else. Probably because the engagement's really there. B2B, the articles tend to be very tailored. In the B2B vertical, it's probably easier to target the user as well. It tends to be a little more niche. So to me, it's no surprise that it's way higher than everything else. Now, when we look at news and finance, let's say that's at a 0.7%. That's actually later this year, that percentage went up a little bit. Keep in mind that banner rates are still in the 0.00 number. So even though these might look low, these are still significantly higher than a lot of typical display. So the big takeaway here is if you're not in native ad, get into native ad. When we look at the stats by device, this one's really interesting. Look at the CTR for mobile, it's 0.38. Look at it for tablet, it's 0.51. Okay? And then look at it for desktop, it's it's 0.13. But that doesn't tell the full story, because then look at the amount of hours that are spent when so basically the page views and the engagement across those three. You'll notice that desktop is very similar to mobile. So what that shows us is although the CTR might be lower on a desktop, people are still spending, or are actually spending more time on sponsored content on a desktop than they are on mobile. And then look at tablet, really high CTRs, but low engagement. These are things to keep in mind as you're putting your strategy together. This is our #1 most asked question. Does putting a logo on your sponsored content increase CTR? We did a lot of research. This stat is from all our North American data. It shows that it only does 12% better. So it doesn't do a significant amount. Whereas when we looked at the data across the pond with our folks in the UK, it's actually 58%. But again, everyone's a little different. So you're going to want to do some A/B testing. But that's our all-time most asked question. What else do we got? Oh, let's jump into mobile here. We asked publishers, are you running native ads on your mobile devices? And 79% said yes, they are. Okay, that sounds great. But then we asked, what percentage of your ads are actually served on mobile? And they only said 18%. So what that basically accounts to is although a lot of their traffic, a lot of publishers' traffic is moving to mobile because more and more people are consuming through this content, their digital strategy, especially around native, is not following suit. So I hope this time next year that number is way, way higher, that as an industry we start focusing more on mobile. Let's look at some other mobile stats. We looked at how mobile performed over desktop. I don't think it's going to come as a big surprise. It was 50% higher CTR. Again, you probably knew that already because mobile is just so hot right now. This one's really interesting. We looked at the engagement on desktop versus tablet. So what we did is we looked at a bunch of publishers that don't have a tablet optimized site. So basically, you have the exact same content, the exact same ads, native ads, that appear on the desktop as they do on the tablet. And yet, the tablet had 2 times better CTR when the native ad appeared on a tablet versus a desktop. That, again, is explaining more about your audience here, that folks tend to be much more engaged with content when it's in their hands, when it's more tangible, when it's in their tablet. That's why even though it's the exact same site as their desktop, the propensity is to engage at a higher rate on tablet. And what's the difference between desktop in terms of engagement, desktop and tablet? We saw 2 times more time spent. So the engagement was 2 times better with tablet over desktop. And when we looked at mobile, it was actually 2.5. So again, people, once they are on their mobile phone and actually engaged with your content, they're spending more time with it. That means they're sharing it more. That means more people are seeing it, more people are exposed to it. That means more people are coming back to it as well. What else do we got? If you want to see more benchmarks, you can visit our site, polar.me/benchmarks. We look at all sorts of things like does having a border do better for your native ad than not having a border? When you shade the background, a lot of times when you see a sponsored piece of content, you see shading in the background. If you use lighter shading versus darker shading, what does that do to your CTR? We look at all that sort of stuff. We also have a lot of geography-based data on there. So if you're a publisher that has data that's coming from outside of North America, there's some great stuff there. So check it out. Since we have a bit of time, I will go through this last section. This is the go-to-market strategy. So we've kind of already talked about putting all the different components, how to price it, how to perfect it with benchmarks. Now, how do you actually go to market with it? So it starts off by, even Shakespeare asked, what's in a name? So a name is very important because in life, we name everything. We name our children, we name our dogs, we even name our muscle cars. And yes, that's my little dog in the lower right-hand corner there, a little cylinder. But as marketers, sometimes when it comes time to name our native ad program, we don't get as creative and we call it the native ads program. So we think because native ads is the fastest growing digital advertising stream out there, it's really important that you brand it properly, especially as sponsors start visiting your site directly so they know, wow, these guys are serious about native ads. So when we look at what some other folks in the industry do, look at HuffPost. What they do is they name their custom content team as opposed to naming their actual native ads program. So HuffPost Partner Studio. Slate does something similar. Slate Custom is the name of their team as well as the name of their ad units. You'll notice Slate doesn't use logos. They actually did their own A/B testing, and when they were on a panel with us a couple of months ago, they revealed that they actually got higher CTR by not using the logo, unless it was geo-targeted, in which case the CTR was higher with a logo because they did a certain native ad with I think it was the University of California, and they geo-targeted it to Californians. So I guess when they saw the logo, they put more authority behind the article and they had a higher propensity to actually click through to it. So again, that's why A/B testing is so important. Forbes, Forbes of course has brand voice, and then once you become a sponsor, you become X voice. In this case, it's Salesforce voice. One of our clients on B2B, ALM, when they went to market with their strategy, they branded it Brand Perspectives, and it's doing very well for them. Anyone from ALM in the room by any chance? Okay. Very, very successful program for them. Washington Post uses Brand Studio, and then the New York Post uses Post Studios. Again, they name their program the same as their custom content team. So here's a little fun little leave behind. If you ever want to engage with your team on putting together a branding exercise, here's a good way to do it. You start by printing that, photocopying it, ordering lots of beer, lots of pizza, and then you start ideating ideas on brand names and logos and all sorts of fun stuff. The other piece around native is so important, and that's transparency. Now, look, no consumer likes to be fooled, and consumers are smart. So if you have sponsored content, it should be labeled properly as such. And there's really 3 distinct ways to label your content. On the left there, you'll see that one uses what we call the sponsored logo. So in this case, it says promoted by, and then the sponsor's logo, which is Fitness World, another made-up company. So that's one way to label your content. In the middle there, you use your existing badge and you override it with your sponsored badge. So as you'll see, typically that would say fitness because it's part of the fitness category. You remove the word fitness and you put the word sponsored in there. So it's overriding an existing category, an existing badge. You change the color as well. The third, as you see up there, you create a brand new badge. So that's why you'll see sponsored content up at the top. When we look at the data, using a brand new badge actually has a higher click-through rate than any of the other ones. So that's also something to keep in mind as you're putting your program together. And that's part of the benchmarks that's on our website. Here are some thought starters. Some thought starters as well. If you're thinking of ideas, these are what a lot of our publishers use. So when we surveyed everyone, we looked at all their badges. These are the most common ones. Sponsored content, dedicated feature, paid promotion. couple of tidbits. Whatever you do, try to stick with one of these. Don't, especially if you have multiple placements on one page, don't start mixing these things up. We had one client that had a few different placements on their homepage, and each placement had a different badge. So maybe one said sponsor content, the other one said promoted content, one of them said dedicated feature. When they moved to our platform and decided to move to this model where you only use one badge, they actually saw their CTR go up. And we think it had a lot to do with the trust factor. Is when you start using all these different badges, again, consumers are not dumb. They might think, are these guys trying to fool me? Like, what's going on? Why are they using all these different ways of basically, saying that this is paid for, that this is an advertorial? Whereas when they move to just one, suddenly they're building that trust. They're saying to the client, look, we know that this is paid for, but we looked at this content and we know it's good and we think it's relevant to you. So believe it or not, all that in 2 or 3 words, all that's conveyed in 2 or 3 words to the user. Last is sales enablement, and then hopefully you guys have tons of questions that I can help you out with, and then I promise I'm going to turn you over to the lunch. Sales enablement's really important, and actually, if you guys were here in the panel earlier, one of the things that they talked about was how does the business side talk to the technical side? And here, this is really important because it's really how does the marketing side or the media side talk to the sales side? And this is so important. Sales, now for any salesperson in the room, please don't take this the wrong way. Sales tends to sell the easiest thing or the road of least resistance. And banners are probably the easiest type of media to sell. And this is why salespeople will just continue to sell banners. But as a publisher, you want them selling native ads because at the end of the day, that's what's going to make you more money. So you need to enable your sales team to understand that and to give them the tools necessary to actually go out and sell native ads. Put together some training. What I just went through today is actually a great training for your sales team, helping them understand what a native ad is, why it's important, what the business looks like. We have a lot of clients that actually take the collateral that we put together and use it for training. And that's cool because we want to make sure that their sales reps understand what a native ad is, why it's important to their business to sell it, and then how to actually sell it. Which brings us to that middle one there, a sales kit with a pitch deck. You probably have a sales kit already for your display stuff. Put one together for native ads. Make sure it's in there. Make sure they're talking about it. And targets. That really helps as well. So do spiffs and incentives. And any salesperson in the room at this point is going to start nodding because when you spiff a sales rep, they will go out and they will sell it. And competition is good. A little bit of healthy competition within the sales team. Maybe the first sales rep to sell it gets gets an extra 5,000 that quarter, or the biggest native ad, gets a couple of thousand, or a Kelsey's gift card. I don't know, just anything. Any type of target. What's also important, especially around the sales kit, is to remember that these things can work together. So yeah, display is easy to sell, and you're not telling your sales team don't go out and sell display. What you're saying is sell display and native. Because as I showed you earlier, or as we talked about in the pricing, but I didn't share the stats, we find that display ads have a higher CTR when they're coupled with an actual native ad. What does that mean to a sales rep? It means you can sell more, or rather, you can sell at a higher price of that companion display ad. That's why it's really important to start packaging these things together and to have your sales rep selling them. So these are the 4 things we just talked about. Bring your native ad select. We talked about all the different components. We talked about the pricing and packaging. We talked about the brand and press plan, then how to go to market and enable your sales team.